Amara Johnson had worked double shifts at Maplewood Diner for so long that the smell of coffee lived in her clothes. But even exhaustion couldn't dull the soft ache she felt every time she noticed the tiny girl in the wheelchair by booth 6. It started 3 months earlier, when the child and an older caretaker began to visit every Wednesday, quiet, polite, barely ordering anything. Amara noticed how the caretaker always hesitated before choosing the cheapest item on the menu, how the little girl never complained, how her bright eyes absorbed the chatter around her like she was desperate to feel part of the world. Amara understood struggle. Her own childhood had been more empty plate than full. But something about this girl stirred something deeper, a memory of helplessness she refused to let anyone else endure. On one particularly slow evening, after counting her meager $6 tips, she approached the pair with a warm smile and placed a plate of pancakes on the table. "Extra order on the house," she whispered, even though it came straight from her own wallet. The caretaker's eyes filled with shame, then gratitude, and the girl's smile, wide, pure, unfiltered, felt like sunlight cracking through weeks of overcast skies. From that moment, Amara made it a silent mission. Every time the girl came in, she would make sure the child ate something real, not scraps. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that on that exact night, sitting quietly in the far corner, disguised under a simple baseball cap, a man had been watching her. A man whose name the world whispered with awe. Billionaire Ethan Reeves, the hotel tycoon whose face appeared on magazines, who was said to have the coldest heart in the state, had returned to town for one reason: to find the woman who had been caring for his daughter after she mysteriously ran away from her previous caretakers. But what he found was a waitress with tired eyes and a generosity that made no sense to him. He watched as she gave away her own meal, as she smiled despite her fatigue, as she wiped syrup off the girl's chin like she was her own child. Ethan had built empires, bought skyscrapers, crushed competitors, but he had never seen kindness given freely. He stayed hidden that night, saying nothing, letting the image of Amara linger in his mind long after he drove away. In that moment, he made a silent promise: he would return, and the next time he wouldn't stay in the shadows. The following weeks unfolded like a quiet miracle inside Maplewood Diner as Amara continued her secret ritual, slipping part of her hard-earned tips into covering Lily's meals, pretending they were kitchen errors or leftovers, so the caretaker wouldn't feel embarrassed, even though it meant Amara sometimes walked home hungry, counting coins to make rent, refusing extra shifts because she didn't want to miss the days Lily came in. Customers noticed her smile, but not the fatigue behind it, nor the way she winced each time she opened her nearly empty tip jar. And while she tried to hide the financial strain tightening around her like an invisible rope, someone else noticed everything: Ethan Reeves, who returned again and again in different disguises, slipping into corner booths like a ghost, haunting his own regrets. He watched as Amara cleaned Lily's face with gentle affection, listened as she made up fantastical stories to make the child laugh, marveled as she treated a stranger's daughter with more patience than most parents gave their own kids. The billionaire who built empires began tracking the patterns of a waitress who had nothing except a heart large enough to feed someone else's child without hesitation. Every time Amara gave up her tips, Ethan felt something crack inside him, a mixture of admiration and shame, because he knew the truth Miss Haynes had desperately tried to hide. The allowance he sent to support Lily's care was barely reaching the girl, due to a handling error in his own company, one he'd been too preoccupied to notice. He watched Amara work double shifts, rushing from table to table with a limp she tried to conceal, laughing with customers who never tipped enough, yet still finding the energy to kneel beside Lily and feed her tiny bites of scrambled eggs. One night, when the diner was nearly empty and rain battered against the windows, Amara counted her tips, 80 nows, and without hesitation bought a bowl of soup for Lily, wiping her hands on her apron before delivering it with her brightest smile. Ethan clenched his jaw, furious at himself for letting his daughter depend on the kindness of a woman who could barely keep her own lights on. That's when he noticed the manager watching Amara with narrowed eyes, and moments later he overheard him accusing her of stealing from the till, an accusation Amara denied with quiet dignity, even as her cheeks flushed with humiliation. Ethan watched the confrontation unfold, his blood boiling, ready to intervene, but Amara simply lowered her gaze and said, "If you think I'd ever steal, you don't know me at all," before returning to clean tables with trembling hands. Something inside Ethan shifted then, not just respect, but a fierce protectiveness he didn't recognize. He realized this wasn't just a waitress being kind. This was a good woman being overlooked, underestimated, and pushed to the edge by a world that had taken more from her than it ever gave. And as he watched her feed Lily again that night, unaware that a billionaire was silently guarding her from across the room, Ethan made a decision that would change all their lives. He would step out of the shadows. He just didn't know that fate would force his hand sooner than he planned. The storm rolled in like a warning from the heavens, thunder growling over Maplewood Diner as Amara rushed between tables, soaked from running in late after her bus broke down, but still smiling as she spotted little Lily waiting in booth 6, bundled in a pink blanket, while her caretaker, Miss Haynes, dabbed her forehead with a worried tremble in her hands. Something was wrong tonight. Lily was paler than usual, her breaths shallow, her frail fingers trembling as she tried to hold her spoon. And within seconds, Amara was kneeling beside her, encouraging her softly, ignoring customers calling for refills because nothing mattered except the child whimpering in front of her. When Lily tried to speak but only coughed weakly, Amara didn't hesitate. She grabbed her own untouched dinner plate, cutting the food into tiny pieces, whispering encouragement, warming the meal twice when Lily couldn't swallow it right, and when she realized the caretaker had been rationing food because she didn't have enough money for both dinner and Lily's medicine, Amara did what she always did. She reached into her apron, took the entire $42 she had made in tips she desperately needed for her overdue rent, and pressed it into Miss Haynes's shaking hands with a smile that pretended she wasn't breaking inside. "Please, just let her eat," she whispered. Miss Haynes cried silently, overwhelmed by a kindness she hadn't earned. But Amara only squeezed her hand, promising everything would be okay, even though she knew she had no idea how to save herself, let alone anyone else. But that night, as lightning flashed across the diner windows, another pair of eyes watched from the shadows. Ethan Reeves, drenched from the rain, frozen by the sight of the woman who had been feeding his daughter out of her own pocket. A woman who wasn't related, wasn't responsible, wasn't paid, but was doing more good for Lily. Responsible. Wasn't paid, but was doing more good for Lily than half the trained professionals he'd hired. His chest tightened painfully as he watched Amara stroke Lily's cheek with the gentleness of a mother, whispering, "You're safe, sweetheart. I'm right here." And Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Shame. Shame for missing what his daughter needed. Shame for believing money solved everything. Shame for never once kneeling beside Lily's wheelchair the way this stranger did. When Lily suddenly went still, eyes unfocused, Amara was the first to react. Shouting for help, lifting the frail girl with desperate strength, sprinting into the storm toward her car without even grabbing her purse. Ethan acted on instinct, chasing after them, watching in disbelief as Amara shielded Lily from the rain with her own body, whispering prayers between gasps as she sped toward the nearest clinic. For the first time in his life, Ethan Reeves wasn't in control. Amara was. And as he followed her taillights through the storm, heart thundering louder than the sky, he realized something terrifying. This waitress, the woman he'd underestimated, overlooked, and silently admired from the corner, might be the only person in the world who truly understood his daughter. And he wasn't sure if he was ready for what that meant. The clinic waiting room buzzed with low fluorescent lights and the sharp scent of antiseptic as Amara paced back and forth, soaked from the storm and trembling with worry, her apron still clinging to her like a second skin. She didn't care that her hair was plastered to her face or that her shoes squelched with every step. Lily was behind those double doors, fighting for breath, and nothing else in the universe mattered. Miss Haynes sat silently in a plastic chair, face buried in her hands, whispering apologies to a god she felt she had failed. But Amara kept reassuring her, repeating that it wasn't her fault, that she had done everything she could, though inside Amara felt the crushing weight of guilt for not realizing sooner that Lily had been deteriorating. Then the entrance doors burst open with a violent slam, and in strode Ethan Reeves, not in a tailored suit, not as the billionaire with a city at his command, but as a father with panic in his eyes and rain dripping off his jaw as he scanned the room until his gaze locked on Amara. She froze, confused by the intensity of his stare, but before she could ask who he was, he marched up to the receptionist, slammed a hand on the counter, and demanded immediate access to Lily. "Sir, only family," the receptionist began, but Ethan cut her off with a voice that shook the room. "I am her family. Lily Reeves is my daughter." The world seemed to stop. Miss Haynes gasped, whispering his name like she couldn't believe it, while Amara stumbled back a step, her breath catching as she stared at the powerful man she'd unknowingly served coffee to in the diner shadows. The billionaire everyone recognized, the man whose face was on magazine covers, was Lily's father, and he had been watching her. Ethan didn't look at anyone except Amara now, his voice softening with something like gratitude or vulnerability, two emotions foreign to him, as he said, "You took care of my daughter when I didn't even know she needed it." His voice cracked, raw and unfiltered, and Amara felt her heart twist painfully because beneath his polished exterior was a desperate father who loved a little girl more than anything. But the moment shattered when a doctor rushed out, breathless and urgent, announcing that Lily's condition had worsened and she needed immediate transfer to a specialized children's hospital. Without hesitation, Ethan pulled out his phone, summoning an air ambulance, ordering specialists, mobilizing an entire medical network with the ease of a man used to shaping the world to his will. Yet he kept glancing at Amara, as if drawing strength from her, repeating her name like it grounded him. "Don't leave," he whispered when she stepped back, unsure of her place in this unfolding reality. "Lily trusts you. I saw it. She needs you." Amara felt her throat tighten with a mixture of fear, shock, and something deeper she didn't want to name. Why would a billionaire want her anywhere near all this? But when Lily was wheeled out, tiny and fragile, her small hand instinctively reached toward Amara, not her caretaker, not even Ethan. And the room fell silent as Amara stepped forward, gently taking the child's trembling fingers. The moment carved itself into Ethan's heart, like truth revealed. Lily didn't just need medical care, she needed love, the kind only this waitress had been giving her. And as they all hurried into the storm toward the ambulance, Ethan walked beside Amara, no longer hiding in the shadows. For the first time, he wasn't a billionaire or a tycoon. He was a father trying to save his daughter. And he knew with absolute certainty that he wouldn't do it without her. The children's hospital loomed like a silent fortress against the fading storm, its windows glowing with a soft golden light that made the world outside feel smaller, quieter, almost reverent as Amara stepped off the ambulance, still holding Lily's hand as doctors rushed the fragile girl through sliding doors and down a hallway that smelled of hope and fear intertwined. Ethan stayed close behind, his usually commanding presence reduced to nervous pacing, eyes fixed on the small figure being swallowed by the medical team. And when the doors closed between them and Lily, he let out a breath that sounded like a man unraveling. Hours passed, long, torturous hours, during which Amara sat beside him in the waiting area, hair still damp, hands clasped tightly in her lap, as she watched a billionaire tremble like any father terrified of losing the one thing money could never replace. He spoke then, not as Ethan Reeves the mogul, but as a man stripped bare. He told her about the accident that had taken Lily's mother, the guilt that hollowed him out, the fear that made him hire caretakers instead of raising his daughter himself because he was convinced he would fail her the way he failed his wife. Amara listened quietly, letting his pain settle between them, offering the kind of empathy that wasn't dramatic or loud. It was simple, human, honest. And for the first time since the tragedy that fractured his world, Ethan felt seen, not as a symbol of power, but as a flawed man trying desperately to learn how to be a father again. When the doctor finally emerged with a tired smile, relief swept through the room. Lily was stable. Her malnutrition, worsening respiratory issues, and stress had pushed her fragile body to the edge, but they had managed to pull her back. "She needs rest," the doctor said, "and she needs people who love her close by." Ethan turned to thank him, but his eyes immediately found Amara, because he knew exactly who the doctor meant. Minutes later, they were led into Lily's room, where machines hummed gently and soft lights cast warm halos across the walls. Lily stirred weakly, blinking up at them, and when she saw Amara, her eyes brightened despite the tubes and monitors. "You came," she whispered. Amara's heart clenched as she brushed a curl from the girl's forehead. "Always," she whispered back. Ethan watched the exchange with a fullness in his chest he'd never felt. gratitude, awe, and something deeper, something dangerous in its tenderness. Then, with a steady breath, he stepped closer and said softly, "Amara, I owe you more than I can ever repay." She shook her head, insisting she had done nothing extraordinary, but he lifted her hand gently, holding it as though it were something precious. "You fed my daughter when I didn't even know she was hungry," he said. "You saw her when I was too blinded by my own guilt. You cared for her with nothing to gain." His voice tightened. "I need you in her life. And if you'll let me, I need you in mine too." The words stunned her. Beautiful, terrifying, impossible. Yet the sincerity in his gaze made her heart ache in a way that felt like coming home. She didn't answer right away, but when Lily squeezed both their hands together, the message was clear. Whatever future lay ahead, it belonged to all three of them. Weeks later, after Lily recovered fully and was brought home to a house filled with warmth, for the first time since her mother died, Ethan invited Amara not as an employee, not as charity, but as part of the family that had begun forming the moment she offered a plate of pancakes to a hungry little girl. It wasn't wealth that bound them, nor gratitude. It was the simple, powerful truth that kindness had changed all their lives. Standing together on the balcony overlooking the sunrise, with Lily's laughter echoing behind them, Ethan whispered, "You saved us." Amara smiled softly, resting her head against his shoulder. "No," she said, "we saved each other." And from that day forward, their story, born in a diner, forged in a storm, sealed in the quiet miracle of a hospital room, became a testament to how one act of kindness can rewrite destiny